From NJ.com, this is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
Welcome on in, Giants fans, to episode 165 of the Talk is Cheap podcast right here on NJ.com. As always, I'm Matt Lombardo, joined by my friend and colleague Darryl Slater. Back again. Not much has changed with the Giants. Monday night against the Cowboys. New game, division rival. Same result. They fall to Dallas on Monday at MetLife, 37-18. And, Darryl, you look at this team right now and all of the things that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, it seems like it has presented itself. Pat Shurmur on the hot seat, concerns about Daniel Jones' regression, and a litmus test game against the New York Jets heading into the bye week.
Yeah, I mean, a few weeks ago we talked about this is a good stretch of tests for the Giants with Cardinals, Lions, Cowboys, Jets of where this team is at, of where Pat Shurmur is at in terms of his job security, where Daniel Jones is at in terms of his progress, and now here we are, and the Giants have lost all three of those games so far. So, this is a can't-lose game for the Giants, a can't-lose game for Pat Shurmur. And certainly, I think if you look at this, and we'll probably mostly talk big picture here, but Daniel Jones did some okay things, but once again, the turnovers continue to be an issue. 16 turnovers for him so far this season, 8 lost fumbles, 8 interceptions. And that's just far too many.
Yep, no, I totally agree. We're getting into all of that, but of course some housekeeping at the top of the show here. If you like what you hear, we'd love if you would subscribe on the Apple Podcast Store. Give us a like on YouTube. Check us out on SoundCloud, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Of course, you can follow the show on Twitter. He's at Darryl Slater. I'm at Matt Lombardo NFL. And of course, the podcast has its own handle, at Talk is Cheap NYG. And as always, we appreciate those 5-star reviews. You can rip us if you want. Just leave us those 5 stars. Review for you here, Darryl, from DNC DJ HG. He says, I love the honesty. I've tried several Giant-specific podcasts, and this one is the best one out there. They're very realistic, they're blunt, and they're rational. They never come off as too optimistic or pessimistic. They're even fun to listen to and have good chemistry. By the way, fire Shermer.
That legitimately made me laugh. I wasn't pretending there. That was yeah. So very nice. Thanks for reading. Thanks for writing in, and thanks for listening.
I appreciate that. And of course, I think that's a good place for us to start this podcast, Darryl, is once again, it feels like Groundhog Day around here, because every week since you've jumped over onto the podcast, whether it was leading up to the Cardinal game or going to Detroit against the Lions, a couple of winnable games, a game at home against the Dallas Cowboys that you didn't really know what Dallas was coming off that big win against the Eagles and thought maybe there was an opportunity for the Giants to put forth a solid showing. But the underlying theme has been Pat Shurmur has had multiple opportunities to have his team ready to play, to win a game against a beatable opponent and kind of silence the doubters, silence the critics, and kind of build up some job security, but it's gone the other way. And I think we've reached a crescendo this week in that a game against the Jets where you can make a case after they lost to the Dolphins, where the Jets could have left Adam Gase on the tarmac, that it now presents itself that if the Giants lose this game on Sunday, the talk, I believe, the conversations in the building start to begin about what Pat Shurmur's future is beyond this year.
No doubt. They have to. I mean, I understand rookie quarterback and all that, but we've talked here on about it and we've written it. Having a rookie quarterback doesn't mean you keep your job. I mean, Hugh Jackson, we're going back to Jeff Fisher, Todd Bowles last year. And yes, it's a little different because the Giants did hire Pat Shurmur to mold Eli Manning's replacement. And yes, Daniel Jones has done some okay things and has shown some progress this year. So I think the Giants brass will have to weigh all of that, but there's also optics. And we talked in hypotheticals last week about what happens if they lose to the Cowboys and then lose to the Jets? Well, they're one loss away from making that hypothetical a reality.
Yeah.
And the optics would be really, really bad if they lost to this Jets team in particular. Obviously, everyone knows how much they're struggling, and then the embarrassing loss last week to the Dolphins. So this is, like I said, this is a can't-lose game for Shermer because they go into the bye week at 2-8 with 8 straight losses. The conversations have to start about whether he's got much of a future here because they need to start showing some results here on multiple fronts. I mean, the defense is an issue too, big plays and all that, young players, and we get it. We get the youth as part of it, but The Giants brass, John Mara, they don't take too kindly to, really John Mara in particular, to being, having embarrassing results.
And I think that losing to the Jets would be an embarrassment. And I also think that everybody, and this seems to be building on Twitter, you're out talking to fans, you listen to talk radio, you talk to people around the league. There seems to be a thought that if they lose to the Jets, Pat Shurmur could be fired on Monday. And I don't know that I would completely rule it out, but I say that's very highly unlikely because unlike a lot of organizations, unlike, say, the Cleveland Browns or Washington, or to a certain extent, you can even lump the Jets into that mold based on the last decade or two of how they've done things. The Giants are very image conscious. You brought this up the other week. This would be 2 head coaches fired in 3 years in season. If you think back to Ben McAdoo, fired in the month of December, 1 year removed from an 11-5 year and a playoff berth. If they fire Shermer midseason, that's twice in 3 years. And I just don't think that the Mara family, Steve Tisch, the organization is willing to go down that road. And I think you and I might be in a little bit of agreement here, and you can disagree if we aren't. You can have legitimate conversations about firing the coach after a 5-11 season, after a 2-7 start to the year, after 6 straight losses. It would be 2-8 going into the bye week. You can talk about those things, but I don't think that it's a move the Giants are going to make in the immediate future if the Giants don't win on Sunday.
No, I would be very surprised if he was fired in the bye week. I'm sure, the pitchforks and all that will be out for him, if they don't win the game publicly. And I'm sure John Mara will take all that into account. I don't think he's going to get fired, in the bye week. Let's say they keep losing and losing and losing, and it becomes a situation where they're 2-12. Or 2-13. Yeah, I think he could be fired at 2-12, 2-13. Sure, I think that could happen. I think that could certainly happen because then you're talking about like 11 straight losses. But that's a hypothetical that is a little bit a ways away.
Right. You still have a game against Washington and a game against Miami where you should be favored to win those games. They're 1.5-point dogs against the Jets, but you should be favored against the Dolphins and against Washington when you play them.
Yeah, and they're 1.5-point underdogs against the Jets. That surprises me. That really surprises me. And I think a lot of that has to do with, and we can just touch on it briefly, the injuries. And look, we're not going to get too much into this game in particular, but looks like, the Giants are not going to have Evan Ingram. They're not going to have Sterling Shepard. They're not going to have John Halapio. And Mike Remmers maybe not playing as well. So it looks like 4 pretty prominent guys could be out. And at the very least, 3 really prominent guys in terms of your starting tight end, receiver, center. So maybe that has something to do with it. But, I don't care what the line is.
Yeah.
You're the Giants, you can't lose this game.
No, I totally agree with that. And you look at just the Giants offense, and you look at Daniel Jones, and you look at the turnovers. And I know we sound like broken records, but it's the same thing every week. You look at the interception the other night at the end of the game. You look at the fumble at the end of the game where he's getting sacked again and the ball pops out and it's returned for a touchdown. It's just the decision-making and the ball security are the 2 biggest issues with Daniel Jones, and they don't seem to be getting better. And I wrote this right after the game. Darryl, it seems like those highlight plays, the one-handed grab by Golden Tate that was a great throw down along the sideline, a couple of the throws against the Lions the previous week where it was a jump ball to Darius Slater for his first touchdown of his career. Those plays seem like they're fewer and further between, and it looks like Daniel Jones is struggling more and more as we go along here. And maybe that's just a product of being a rookie. Maybe that's a product of defenses having more tape that they can study and exploit some of those weaknesses and kind of trick him into making some mistakes against shell coverage like the Arizona Cardinals did and like the New England Patriots did. But more so than the wins and losses, more so than the 5-game losing streak, I think what should be more concerning for the Giants and their fans is that Daniel Jones isn't progressing. It seems like he's regressing.
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's easy to look at the wins and losses, but this season was really never about necessarily wins and losses. Of course, the Giants didn't want to see, and their fans don't want to see them get embarrassed on a week-in, week-out basis and have massively long losing streaks like this. But this season, the number one storyline is the development of Daniel Jones, and right now it looks like a lack of development, unfortunately for him. And the thing, simple stuff, keeping 2 hands on the ball in the pocket, or when you're moving around just out of the pocket, that's very basic stuff that can get lost in the head of a young quarterback, and you've seen it happen so far at inopportune times here for Daniel Jones. And this is some of the stuff that Sam Darnold went through last year before he had his late season uptick, which now, in some ways looks like a little bit of a mirage. But again, the offensive line over there with the Jets is a disaster. The Giants' offensive line's a mitigating factor for some of Daniel Jones' struggles as well. So, and I think we kind of kicked all of these topics around. You and I and Matt Stipolkowski, who covers the Jets for us, did a little roundtable thing in print that we did today on the website. So if you want to check that out, there's a lot more than what we're just talking about here about why these quarterbacks are at the points where they are in terms of the struggles. But yeah, I mean, like, the numbers for Jones are really interesting because it's such a feast or famine year for him.
Oh,
you
for
alluded
sure.
to all the things that he's done well, and the numbers are pretty good, at least compared to Darnold. If you take the turnovers out, the problem is you can't take the turnovers out. Just like it's asinine for a defensive coordinator to get up there and do what James Betcher did today and talk about, well, if you take these big plays out, what do you? That's the problem. Yeah, if you take out the problem, we don't have a problem. Oh, thanks. Yeah, yeah, I didn't realize that. Of course. So the turnovers are always going to spoil a lot of the good because they obviously lead to points for the opposition.
For sure. And you look at what Sam Darnold's doing across town right now, and I think that was rock bottom last week against the Dolphins, having the snap go over his head into the end zone, the pick down deep into the red zone where you just scratch your head about what he's looking at when he throws that ball. And, there have been a couple of moments like that for Daniel Jones. But, Darryl, I think that you're in a really unique situation here because you covered Sam Darnold's rookie year. You saw all 14 of his starts as a rookie last season. You've seen Daniel Jones so far. What do you like about both of them? What do you think is the biggest flaw in terms of their rookie years? And, in terms of who's better off right now, I know we touched on this in the debate with Matt Stipolkowski that you alluded to the people that should go read at NJ.com/Giants or NJ.com/Jets. But where do you think these two quarterbacks are, and where do you think Jones might be ahead of or behind Darnold where he was as a rookie?
Well, I think Jones probably has a more stable and legitimate coaching situation, and we didn't really get into that on there, so this is sort of supplemental, but the Jets' coaching staff last year was a disaster. I mean, Jeremy Bates was a complete disaster as an offensive coordinator, and I think that for all the flaws for Pat Shurmur, Mike Shula, I think they certainly cleared the low bar of Jeremy Bates in terms of what the rookie quarterback had in terms of a guidance as in his first year. That is an advantage for Jones, and I think the turnovers thing was an issue for Darnold last year also. I mean, that's a pretty typical issue for a rookie quarterback, so that's one thing that they kind of share in common with their problems. I think we talked about it at length on there about the guys around them. And it's easy to talk about Le'Veon Bell versus Barkley or, Tate versus Golden Tate versus Jameson Crowder. But I think you have to boil it down to just the offensive line situation. So yes, the Giants have problems on their line with their tackles, especially Remmers and Nate Solder. But the Jets' offensive line is historically atrocious. So, I mean, I know everyone talks about, Darnold taking the next step in year two, and he hasn't really done that. Some of it's his own issue, some of it's his own shortcomings, happy feet and all that stuff, but a lot of that stems from the line being so dreadful. The Jets have not done a good enough job of drafting to help Darnold on the line. I mean, Giants fans, you think the Giants have done a poor job of addressing things on the offensive line and doing patchwork signings like the big money they gave Nate Solder. The Jets have done an even worse job. Yeah. I mean, and mainly in terms of just the lack of prominent offensive linemen that they've even drafted. In terms of drafting an offensive line in the first or second round, they just haven't done a good enough job of that. And that's a lot because they have all the roster holes that they've had to fill. But yeah, I mean, it really was underscored by last week's opponent for the Giants, and the Jets played them earlier this year, the Dallas Cowboys, a team that's done a really nice job of drafting offensive linemen high. Yeah. Round one, round two, that whole line.
They committed to building their offensive line through the draft and targeting premium players.
And it helped at the time when they were doing that they did have, for some of those guys when they were drafted, Tony Romo,
right, and
now Dak Prescott. So they didn't have to use these high picks on a quarterback over and over. They got Romo as well. He was with them forever, and then Dak Prescott, they got him in the fourth round. So it turned out great for them. They've done a really good job in terms of you can draft an offensive lineman high, doesn't mean he's always going to work out. Eric Flowers.
Right.
So there you go. I think that's a case in point for how much a line can help a quarterback in an offense.
And I think the Giants are closer to having that completed offensive line. There's still a miles and miles of ways to go, because even though you seem to be settled at the guard spots with Kevin Zeitler, who's played reasonably well, and Will Hernandez, who seems to be developing pretty quickly and having a solid year for himself, you still need to find 2 young tackles. And I think that's the biggest concern for the Giants, because it looks more and more like the Nate Solder contract isn't just an albatross, but that he's just not going to be what you thought he was going to be going into the future. And there's nothing more detrimental to a young quarterback than having poor offensive tackle play. And I think that it's one thing, as you said, to draft an offensive tackle high. It's another one to draft a guy high who's going to step in and be that cornerstone for your offensive line and for your franchise, which is what the Giants need. They need not just 1, but 2. And I think the supporting cast might be a little bit better for Jones. I think that Barkley and Le'Veon Bell are kind of a wash in terms of, who's better than who. But I think the Giants have to, as long as Sterling Shepard gets healthy eventually and gets on the field, have to feel good about the combination of Shepard and Tate and Ingram. But those guys are just so banged up, Darryl. We're now entering week 10, and all 4 of those guys haven't been on the field together. So it's really difficult to discern and decide who has the better supporting cast around them. I think the Giants have more offensive weaponry and talent when they're all together and healthy. But that line, the Giants might be a little bit better in terms of where they are right now, but there's still a lot of work for Dave Gettleman to do, not just this offseason, but maybe even to the next 2 offseasons, in getting 2 young tackles to round out that line and round out that offensive rebuild.
If he sticks around that long. But
that's a great point, too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, it's like you said, really problematic when you cannot have a competent offensive tackle play for a young quarterback, and that's where the Giants are. And generally, you look at these type of things like Nate Solder, giving big money to an offensive tackle or something like that in free agency. I mean, the Jets didn't give huge money to Kelvin Beachum, but those guys, they're becoming free agents because the team that they were with is letting them walk for a reason. That's
Sure.
The reality of it. Trying to patchwork and paper over your offensive line in free agency is generally not the way to go. So,
and Bill Belichick isn't typically wrong,
right?
And in those sort of things. If somebody leaves the New England Patriots, it's very rare that you see guys go out and play at a high level elsewhere.
Yep, yeah, that's a great point. That's that's obviously been the case with Nate Solder. Came to the Giants from the Patriots, got big money, and hasn't at all lived up to it. So these teams, bottom line, whether you're talking about, I think at quarterback, it was the quarterback situations of the Jets and Giants, a lot of hand-wringing around Darnold and Jones. Oh, are these guys going to be the guys? Are these guys going to be the guys? Quite frankly, I think quarterback is not nearly as big of a problem as a lot of the other problems on the rosters for these teams. If they can get those other areas fixed up, and actually I have a story for tomorrow on Phil Simms and Ken O'Brien, looking back at the last time the Jets and Giants really had 2 young rising quarterbacks at the same time. They were both drafted around the same time. But if you look at those Giants teams in the 80s, and you look at Phil Simms' numbers, like for his career, they're not incredible. He won a lot of games, and he even admitted this. The Giants had a lot of talented players around him, and that helps. So if you look at quarterback right now for the Jets and Giants, yes, it can be a problem, and yes, you need a franchise quarterback, but they need to give these guys some help, because these teams are not close in a number of other areas. Not close both to be winners. I'm not talking about close together in terms of how they compare. I'm talking about how close both of these teams are to becoming contenders. Neither is particularly close.
Right.
And the main reason for that is not quarterback. And I think in either case, I think it's all the other stuff that we're talking about.
And if we go big picture long term, and I wrote this in the story that we did for the weekend, I think the Giants are closer to being competitive and pushing for a playoff spot only because of their situations. I tend to be a little more optimistic about Jones. I think that there's more there than with Darnold, and the fact that Darnold is taking such a step back in his second season, I think would be worrisome to the Jets and their fans. We also have to look at the division, and again, the window might be closing for Brady and Belichick up there in New England, but I think the Buffalo Bills have zoomed past the Jets in terms of the hierarchy of that division. I really think Josh Allen is a legitimate franchise quarterback quarterback. I like John Brown a lot, a deep threat at wide receiver. Devin Singletary looks like a player at running back. Ed Oliver is kind of the jack of all trades at defense, just a menace along that defensive line. So I think their road to the postseason is a lot more difficult long term than the Giants, who the Cowboys are going to, in the short term, they might dominate for a year or two and might push for a Super Bowl as early as this season, but the Cowboys are in some self-imposed salary cap hell coming up here after already paying Ezekiel Elliott, going to have to pay Dak Prescott a second quarterback contract, going to have to pay Amari Cooper, and you look down the turnpike in Philadelphia, they committed to Carson Wentz, but that offensive line is getting old very quickly. That defensive line isn't what it used to be, and they're getting old very quickly. They have a lot of the same issues in the secondary that the Giants have, so if the Giants can just round out this offensive line, add a couple of pieces on defense, Darryl, I think long term, the Giants might, just so we're not all doom and gloom here, because there's a lot of doom and gloom in the present, but I think their future might actually be brighter if they can just get this upcoming offseason right. And I just don't know that I can say that about the Jets.
Yeah, I think the Giants are probably closer. I do. I think they're probably closer. And we'll see what Jones becomes in year two, whether he does take that year two leap that a lot of these quarterbacks have. Because, again, not to minimize the quarterback situation, he does have to do his part, and he does have to take the leap, and the jury's still out on him, and the jury's still out on Darnold. But I think you feel better about the jury still being out in year one on a quarterback as opposed to this point in year two, as is the case with Darnold. So I think Giants fans can look at this and say, all right, well, get the pieces in here next offseason, and then hope that Jones takes that next step like a Carson Wentz or Jared Goff did in year two. So, and we'll see if Pat Shurmur is going to be the guy who will be around to help him take that next step.
No doubt about it. And not to be the wet blanket on my own optimism parade a second ago, I just want to throw this out there, Darryl, and get your thoughts on this. Walking into that locker room on Monday night after the game, you've covered the Jets for a number of years. I covered the Eagles for a number of years before moving over here last season. We've both been in a lot of locker rooms, practices, after games. You get a sense for the vibe and the psyche of teams immediately after a loss or during a week. I don't know that I've ever seen a more deflated, downtrodden, defeated locker room than what we walked into on Monday night. It was quiet. You didn't have as many people even in the room from a player standpoint. Guys got out of there quickly. It just seemed like whatever air was left out of the balloon was left in the balloon, was let out of it on Monday night. And you show up at the facility this week, and there's no music in practice on Wednesday. They called it a jog through, kind of a correction period after everything that went wrong in the second half on Monday. But the music wasn't playing again on Thursday during practice. It just seemed like the locker room was a little bit more of a ghost town than normal from a player's perspective on Thursday. I don't know about you, but this just seems to be trending in the wrong direction, which is probably a product of all the losing, but it seems like it's trending in the wrong direction in terms of a morale and just a vibe around this team right now.
It's going to be worse if they lose Sunday.
Oh, no doubt.
I think it was a quiet locker room Monday night, but for some of those depressed Jets locker rooms I've been in, those have been worse, more funereal type environments. But yeah, certainly Monday night was pretty bad, and I think if you look at this situation for this Giants team, I think they're exasperated because they've been in these games, and we've written the same sort of kind of story 3 weeks in a row here now. The Giants were in the game against the Cardinals at the half. They were in the game against the Lions at the half. They were in the game against the Cowboys at the half. They didn't finish. 3 games in a row. This team is still obviously learning how to win, and I think you look at veteran players like Golden Tate, who's a 10th-year pro, and listen to him talk after the game, and it was hard to kind of convey in print. I tried to do it today in a story. He was exasperated, talking about the knuckleheaded mistakes and the Giants kind of beating themselves with some of these things. 1 of 5 in the red zone, all the quarterback turnovers. I mean, he didn't single out Daniel Jones, but you can tell when a guy is really frustrated, and he was obviously really frustrated, and he was, audibly sighing, looking up at the ceiling, talking about they just have to stop kind of beating themselves, that sort of stuff. So, yes, you're starting to hear that tone come through a little bit more in the locker room, and if this team goes into the bye week and is having to stew on a loss to a historically bad Jets team, then
all bets are off.
I mean, exactly. I think that who knows what could happen in terms of the locker room coming apart, in terms of Pat Shurmur's job security. So
And
that's where they're
it's
at.
interesting you bring up everything about Golden Tate because I think you're starting to see that more from Saquon Barkley as well. One of the more eternally optimistic guys a year ago. And, it didn't seem like the losing was really affecting him and kind of echoing Odell Beckham's sentiments in the second half that they were going to put a run together and they weren't out of it and that they could claw back and maybe wind up 8-8 and build some momentum going into this year. Darryl, you take away the Tampa Bay game where he got hurt. Saquon Barkley has not been on the field and finished a game that the Giants have won this season. So he has not been a full participant in a Giants victory yet this year, and you start to get the sense that there's some frustration mounting there. He's not a guy who's used to losing all that often. High school, Whitehall was not necessarily pushing for state championships when he was there, but they were really competitive. Penn State goes to 2 New Year's Six Bowls during his 3 years there, and he comes to the Giants, and you look at the last 2 years, and they've now lost 18 games combined over the last 2 seasons. This isn't a guy who's used to losing, and you can see that it's starting to grate on him. It's starting to grate on some of the veterans in the locker room. I just think that it could get ugly pretty quickly if this thing goes south on Sunday.
For sure. And you look at a lot of these high-profile guys, whether it's Sam Darnold or Saquon Barkley, or obviously Daniel Jones is a little different because the team he played for in college didn't win as much. But these guys they come to the NFL and they're not used to losing. Dexter Lawrence played at Clemson. Dexter Lawrence.
Dalvin Tomlinson at Alabama.
I have to look at this because I wrote it in the preseason. I think Dexter Lawrence's record for the final 2 years of his high school career and then going all the way through to his 3 years at Clemson, I think he lost 5 games in 5 years. So that's crazy. I haven't even thought about that. I should have asked him about that because I was talking to him today for a Q&A. But yeah, this has been quite the adjustment for these guys. And look, it's the harsh reality of the NFL. You can't out-recruit somebody as easily as you can in college. A nice locker room isn't going to buy you a bunch of victories like it does in, at some of these college programs because, you can get the best recruits and you just win on talent alone. And there's a lot more that goes into it. And, I think it'll be this is a kind of a fascinating game and almost kind of a car wreck kind of way.
Yeah.
Just because we were talking about this before you came on the air. So who would it be a worse loss for? The Jets or the Giants?
Yeah, I think that you survey both teams and they'd both be pretty embarrassed if they lost this game. I think that we can sit here and talk all we want about what an embarrassing, tragic loss it would be for the Giants and the trajectory of their franchise, and that's probably true. But the Jets are probably sitting at Florham Park and saying, we can't lose to those guys. Look what's happened to them. They can't close games. Look at all the turnovers that have been created. But I think overall, it has to be much more embarrassing and I think much more consequential for the Giants if they lose this game. I think it's a far worse loss for the Giants than it would be for the Jets.
Yes, because the Jets already had their Waterloo last, if I'm using that.
Right.
I don't even know if I'm using that Napoleonic reference correctly. They already had their total disaster loss last week in Miami. That was this would be the Giants what it was for the Jets last week. Of course, the Giants will still have an opportunity to further exceed the awfulness of the Jets' loss by losing to Miami if they do that. So, I think it would be worse for the Jets or the Giants, yes, for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just a little, just to turn the page to the game real quickly, I think one fascinating storyline to watch is going to be Leonard Williams because this is his first game against his former team. Very unique opportunity to play them in the regular season. Only happens, once every 8 years, 4 years that these guys play. Every 4 years the Giants and Jets square off at MetLife Stadium. So he's going to go up against an offensive line that he's very familiar with. And you did a great story about this coming out of the locker room on Thursday, Darryl, that, you look at this, it's going to be interesting because he was kind of quiet against the Cowboys. He was the 21st rated defender on the Giants roster by Pro Football Focus, but he was their 5th most efficient pass rusher. If he has a big game, if he goes out and he sacks Sam Darnold twice and has 4 tackles for loss, this is going to be the game that he points to and his agent points to and says, this is why you pay this guy. This is going to be, if he breaks out and has a big game, this is going to be one of the things that they hang their hat on.
And there's certainly opportunities for it. The Jets' offensive line is one of the worst in football, and I think they're 27th again in pass blocking and 26th in run blocking, and vice versa. It's in that story there that I have up on the site there about Leonard Williams, kind of giving intel to some of the Giants' defensive linemen about what makes some of these Jets' offensive linemen tick from a personality standpoint. But this could be a jumping off game for him if he's able to take advantage of a weak offensive line and hit Sam Darnold a couple times. And But I think it's to the point with Leonard Williams where you kind of believe it when you believe it when you see it finally, with him being able to cash in some of these sack opportunities. Maybe he's just sort of what he's shown, which is a very good but not great defensive lineman pass rusher. So who's very good against the run. So this is a neat game for him from a personal standpoint, and obviously a big pivotal game for both of these teams. Even though I think this is a more interesting game for these teams than it would be if, say, the Giants are really good and the Jets are bad, or vice versa. It's more intriguing when either both teams are really good, or in this case, both teams are horrendously bad. And
both teams have a lot to lose.
And you're talking about the ownership perhaps really early on pushing the eject button on a coach, whether it's one and done for Gase or two and done for Shermer.
Yeah, no doubt about it. By the way, can we just stop and recognize for a second how outrageous and kind of funny it is that it's not just the X's and O's intel that Leonard Williams is providing, but how to get inside his former teammates' heads? That's great. I mean, you watch these practices, and there is a lot of trash talk that goes on between teammates. So imagine what it's going to be like on Sunday if one of the Jets' offensive linemen is trying to hold a block and he hears Dalvin Tomlinson chirping in his ear, the one thing that's going to set him off. That's a really unique element that I didn't even think of before.
Yeah, and Leonard Williams kind of talked about that today. We were asking him, like, well, what is it that you're sharing intel on? And he said it's not so much the X's and O's and stuff, because that stuff's evident from the film. It's not so much really even the blocking tendencies of a particular player, because really Leonard Williams doesn't really know that about Jets offensive linemen, because first team versus first team, starter versus starter reps happen in training camp a bunch, but they don't really happen that much in the regular season during a practice week. Teams don't put their starters against each other during the practice week, during the regular season, especially not at game speed. So Leonard Williams doesn't really know from a game speed standpoint what like Brian Winters necessarily does great. I mean,
and he's not studying film of Winters during practice either.
He's worked against him in camp, so he knows a little bit about that. But the X's and O's stuff is all evident on film, but it's more so about who's a real tough guy and who's a fake tough guy, is the way Dexter Lawrence basically kind of put it when I asked him about this, in terms of the intel of what makes these guys tick, who's going to push hard to the end of the game, who might wilt a little bit. So that's kind of neat to hear guys talk about that. It would be cooler if they mentioned names or whatever about who these guys are, who they perceive as vulnerable from a mental standpoint, in terms of a mentality and a mindset. But that's so important, at that position on the offensive line, being able to forge ahead and have that aggressive mindset throughout the game, and not everybody can do it. And it's an interesting way to hear Leonard Williams talk about pinpointing maybe the guys who can't do it for the Jets. So that's a neat little subplot for this game for Leonard Williams.
Something definitely to keep an eye on. Before we get out of here, how do you think this thing plays out on Sunday, and what's the biggest storyline we're talking about when we come back from the bye week on Monday?
Well, I'm going to stick with my pick that I made in our pick. I'm going to pick a 10-10 tie. I'm mostly joking, but I think it would be really funny to see. I mean, whatever. I'll pick a tie, 10-10. Sure, why not? If it happens, I'll pat myself on the back for that one. But yeah, I think you're looking at probably a low-scoring game. You're talking about two offenses that are kind of scuffling a little bit. The fallout. Who has a better chance of winning? I think the Giants have a better chance of winning this game. So I think ultimately the Giants will probably win. I would be surprised if the Jets did. And I think if you're, if presuming that result happens, I think a little bit of heat off Pat Shurmur going into the bye week. If it doesn't happen, as we said, we already said what was going to happen, so no reason to rehash that. But from a Jets perspective, I think the storyline coming out of this game will be Adam Gase 1-8, careening potentially toward a one and done. One and done tenure with the Jets, and that was on the table as of last week. Losing to Miami, that was the tipping point for him going toward that possibility. This would strengthen that narrative. I think the Giants, like I said, have a better chance of winning, and I think they do win, unless it's a tie. And they and they take a little heat off Pat Shurmur. They go into the bye week and they get a chance to regroup for what is ultimately a lost season, but with still some pretty big storylines in this lost season.
Shocking, I'm going to go the other way here, right? And I've given this a lot of thought, actually. I kind of, mulled over on my drive up here. I think there's a chance that the Giants take a lead with under a minute and a half to play, okay? They're up 16-14 off an Aldrich Rose's field goal, a chip shot. They get halted in the red zone again. Sam Darnold gets the ball back thanks to a big kickoff return at about the 40-yard line. The Jets drive down the field and kick a game-winning field goal, 17-16.
Wow.
They beat the Giants. They beat James Betcher's defense, and we are back here on Monday talking about potentially a new defensive coordinator and the Giants taking play calling duties away from Pat Shurmur, the first sign that he's a lame duck head coach after year 2. That's how I see this playing out. Nightmare doomsday scenario for the Giants.
If you're going to get specific, how many yards will the Jets offense gain before it kicks the field goal? 20? They started their own 40. They're going to get to where are they going to end the drive?
I think they're going to end the drive at around their the Giants' 30-yard line. So it'll be about what's that, like a 45-yard drive?
40. So it would be a 48-yard field goal, and you're talking about a 30-yard drive.
Yes.
10 and then 20 more.
Yeah.
Oh, a big 30-yard game-winning drive and then kick. That would be very fitting. I think that would be very fitting for a way to end the game for kind of a floundering offenses, right?
So mark the
field
tape.
goal, and then a return, then a little short drive, and then a field goal,
Yes.
and then all the fallout that would be to come if that were the case. I think that certainly all those things would and should be on the table if the Giants manage to lose this game. So
neither offense feels great about itself, and the same Giants struggles that really doomed them Monday night by kicking 3 field goals inside the 20-yard line on 4th and less than 5, come back to bite them again against the Jets. That's where I think we are here. That would be nightmare doomsday, everything on the table scenario.
What are these teams going to go combined in the red zone in this game? If the Giants went 1 of 5 last week,
over under on 2.5. We'll call it 2.5 red zone touchdowns for both teams. So you're taking the over or the under?
oh gosh, I think it'll be 3.
Okay, so you'll take the over. I'll go under on that one because neither one of these offenses really inspire me all that much.
I can't. There's no reason they should. So, geez. I wonder at what point Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones wish they were drafted elsewhere. But
we'll play one more of these over-unders here. More Saquon Barkley touchdowns or Sam Darnold interceptions?
Oh, man.
That's a good one, right?
Yeah. I'm going to say Darnold will throw 1 interception and Barkley will have 2 touchdowns.
I'm going the other way. I think that Barkley scores 1 touchdown and actually 2 picks for Darnold. They have a 2-pick turnover machine type of performance for Sam Darnold.
Well, it'd be great if people could go over to the Meadowlands and bet on these prop bets for the game. Maybe we could tell them, put the prop bets on the board and see what happens.
No doubt about it. Darryl, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, I think we covered everything. I think it'll be like I said, an interesting game Monday or Sunday rather, and in a way that maybe Giants and Jets fans wouldn't want it to be interesting, but you're going to be paying attention and you're going to be watching this game. You can't look away. It's like I said, it's like a car wreck.
Yeah, it's a car wreck. Absolutely, the way to put it. He's Darryl Slater. I'm Matt Lombardo. Appreciate you listening as always. Go ahead and follow the show on Twitter. He's at Darryl Slater. I'm at Matt Lombardo NFL. The show is at Talk is Cheap NYG. We'll talk to you next week after Snoopy Bowl, or as I've been calling it this week, the Battle of the Basement at MetLife Stadium. Keep it here on NJ.com.